All right, welcome to NOAA Live. My name is Nicole Bartlett, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. This series is sponsored by NOAA's Regional Collaboration Network, where I work, which is spread across the country and helps connect people to all that NOAA does. It's also sponsored by Woods Hole Sea Grant at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution here on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. NOAA Live webinars are offered most Wednesdays during the school year at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. To get more information, simply visit the Woods Hole Sea Grant Education webpage or follow them on Facebook. This series is designed to help you get to know NOAA and some of our incredible experts. All of our speakers work for some part of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Today, I'm introducing you to Eric Hutchins with NOAA's Restoration Center in Gloucester, Massachusetts. While we'll be talking about NOAA's role in restoring habitat for migratory fish, we want to recognize that we are all coming to you from the traditional lands of Native communities who have substantial traditional and local knowledge and much to share with us. We acknowledge that Eric is coming to us from the land of the Pawtucket. We are hosting this webinar from the ancestral lands of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead Aquina. A few guidelines before I hand you over to our speaker. You're all muted because we have a lot of people on the line and I'm going to make sure everyone can hear us. However, there is a box where you can write questions. Let us know if you're a class tuning in, and if there are multiple people watching with you, let us know who's asking the questions so I can say their name. We encourage you to ask these questions as we go, and I will keep track for Eric, and he's going to stop every now and then and answer a few. We may not get to all your questions, but we're going to try to do it the best we can. All right, Eric, they are all yours.
Super. My name's Eric Hutchins. I'm happy to be here today. Going to give you this talk. We gave it a catchy name, Dambusters at Work, and that is predominantly the work I do these days. My job most every day is working on busting dams down, bringing them down, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it today in the context, in particular, of 400 years of dam building in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and the past 20 years of removing dams. Going to give you a little bit of context of, it's really exciting to have people from all over the country here on the call today, but looking at this map, if you look in that, it's a map of Massachusetts up here in the Northeast United States. My office is in Gloucester, that little dot there sticking out into the ocean. In my home, where I am right now, I'm in my bedroom, that's my office these days, is in Rockport, which is directly next to Gloucester. And a lot of my talk is going to focus about Plymouth, Massachusetts, which is that little red dot a little bit down the screen from Gloucester. So this is my, where's my cursor? There it is. There's Plymouth. Okay. A little bit of my background. I figured that it would be nice to put a couple of pictures from when I was back in grade school. I had to do some searching to find these. I was actually born in this area. I was born in Rockport. I grew up here, and then I moved to Gloucester. So I'm what's called a Cape Anner. The two towns together are called Cape Ann, and they were settled about 380 years ago. You got a picture here of me in my first grade on the right-hand picture, 1968, and then I found a nice goofy one of myself in 1971 in my third grade. Look at that haircut, huh? I really pulled that one out of the archives. As growing up, even at that age, my interests were fish, salamanders, frogs, snakes, and they've stuck with me ever since. I have enjoyed wildlife and fisheries and reptiles. I'd always be coming home with them, letting them go. But it's in my blood a little bit. And that old picture, that's a picture I have framed at my house. It's my grandmother and my grandfather. And he was a lobsterman who fished for American lobsters out of Rockport. He was also a stone cutter, Rockport. We have a lot of granite quarries here. And here's one of his catches of the day. I think this is back from the 1950s. But you're going to be a little upset when I tell you, if you look at that, that's not a tuna fish. That's actually a harbor porpoise. My grandfather was from Scandinavia, and they liked to eat marine mammals a lot back then, and it was legal to back then. Not anymore, but I'm not sure if my grandmother's smiling in that picture or not. She probably had to eat it for dinner that night. Anyway, a little bit of my background. But I'm going to jump ahead almost 15 years from those pictures, or actually 16 years. Went through my grade school, high school, always stayed on track. I wanted fisheries biology, science, biologist. I wasn't entirely sure, but it always stayed under the umbrella of science. And then in 1983, I had an opportunity. This ship sailed from Gloucester as a sea semester. So while I was in college for studying biology, an opportunity came up for me to spend a whole summer on this boat called the Regina Maris. And they were going to the west coast of Greenland for an 8-week expedition to study humpback whales and do other marine science in the North Atlantic. And I jumped on that opportunity as soon as I could, saved every penny I could, and this was clearly my life-changing event. The opportunity to actually anchor up in front of a fjord and a glacier like this with no one within hundreds of miles of you. We were studying whales, seabirds, glaciers, and fish. It was a fantastic summer. I'm sure all of you will have your life-changing event as you're going through high school and college as well, and this one was certainly mine. During that same summer in 1983, I had my opportunity during a big storm. We had to hide in a fjord, which is basically a sea canyon, to stay out of the heavy waves. And a number of people went ashore just to go for a walk that day because we couldn't do our marine science. Well, I did marine science over the side of the boat and watched the boat that day and fished. And had no idea what I'd find. I did a little bit of sampling, and I caught these huge ocean catfish. They're some of the same species, but others were a northern catfish that we don't see here in New England. I caught enough of these fish in just a couple of hours to feed all 34 people on the boat that night. So everybody that got back together for dinner that night had ocean catfish for dinner. I call it large predator sampling. A lot of fun too. Later on that summer, we were at the highest point above the Arctic Circle near the Jakobshavn Glacier. And it was a nice sunny day, and we're looking at 5 miles across on a calving glacier that's dumping into the Atlantic Ocean with glaciers, icebergs hundreds of feet high. I said, I got to jump in. The captain gave me the permission because we were anchored at that time. I climbed up into the rigging of the ship and jumped about 40 feet through the air into the ocean there. Obviously, everybody had to watch. I got out really quick. How cold do you think that water was next to floating icebergs all around me?
Does anybody want to take a guess? Oh, there it is.
I put that on the screen. Sorry about that. I was giving it on the next slide. It was below freezing. I can't remember if it was 28 degrees or 31, but it was cold. And the only reason it didn't freeze itself was because of the salt water content in the water. So anyway, a little bit of my background in my college days. Okay, the next summer, leading up to my fisheries work, I was studying marine biology at that point, and I had the chance to work as a research scientist making $1 a day on that same boat. At least I didn't have to pay this year. That was my, oh no, I'm sorry, I got paid $1 a day. I guess it doesn't matter much. I was a paid employee to help teach other students about marine science. But this year we were studying the Gulf Stream, 250 miles off the east coast of the United States, way offshore in warm waters, 80-degree water. And of course, I had to bring my fishing rod along. And one day, while we were towing a hook behind the boat, look what hooked onto that, my hook. I had a very relatively light line. It took almost 2 hours to reel this fish in, a white marlin. And that fish was our dinner that night. So I fed the whole 34, 35 people again. I'm going to break it right here and see if anybody has any questions about my grade school, my college years, or any of these fish you've seen. In this picture, these are river herring, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more about here momentarily.
Okay, Eric, we do have one question, or we have a couple coming in, so I'll start with this one. Let's see. Carol wants to know, how is the saltwater percentage the same in all locations? If not, where is the saltwater the most salty?
Yeah, you know, the tropics clearly have the saltier water, and that's because of evaporation. Well, it's for a number of reasons, but a lot of your tropical areas where it's really warm, the water is continuously evaporating, which the salt stays behind, and the water goes up and becomes clouds. So the water gets saltier. Places to the north, up where I live, we don't have as much evaporation. And we have a lot of rivers running in. So we have a lot of rivers that actually dilutes the salt water, though in general, 35, 32, 30 parts per thousand. Salt water is generally the same throughout the world because it migrates and tries to equilibrate. Now, where I was next to that glacier was probably actually quite low salt content because of the amount of water that was probably running out along with those icebergs melting. There was probably a river running underneath them. So I don't remember what it was there, but it might have been just 20 parts, but still salty. So it is different everywhere, but different factors: rivers diluting, icebergs diluting, sun evaporating. Those are probably the three major factors. Good question.
Great. And we have another important question from one of our Hawaii watchers. How much did the marlin weigh? You know they had to ask.
Okay, 1984. It's a white marlin, not a blue marlin, not those big guys that you've got out in Hawaii. It was probably about a 40-pound white marlin. White marlins, if I remember correctly, over 100-pound is a really big white marlin. They're not big marlins. So a 40-pound one wasn't bad, but it wasn't really a prize fish. But I'll tell you, it was I've only caught 2 white marlin in my life, and that was the first one, and it was 250 miles offshore. So I was pretty impressed with it.
Great. And then one final question from Sam. How long have you worked for NOAA?
Officially, I started in 1993. So what's that, about 28 years now. I did contract work for NOAA before that. I actually spent a year up in Alaska. I spent quite a few months out of Kodiak, Alaska, in the Bering Sea and the Shelikof Strait, working on Japanese fishing boats as a biologist collecting data for the US government. And then I worked on East German and Polish boats in the Atlantic, as well as domestic fishing boats for a few years, collecting data on commercial fishing boats where that data would be presented to the US government to help with fisheries management. So I was just a contractor, but I was a contractor for the US government.
Wow, so it's been a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of a long time, one of the trips I did on the Japanese fishing boat out of Alaska, I was at sea straight for over 2 months. That was my longest time ever on a boat at sea. We did not touch land for, I don't remember what it was now. It was less than 3 months, over 2 months. And there was only one other person on the boat that really could speak any English in the dead of winter. So that made for an interesting 2.5 months.
All right. There are a lot of fishing questions, Eric. I feel like we could have that discussion another time. So I'm gonna let you keep going.
Okay. Well, anyway, river herring in this picture, those are alewives. One of the best pictures I've seen of river herring. A friend of mine, Keith Ellenbogen, took this picture, and these are actually pictures taken in Plymouth. Okay. So I'm going to focus in on a couple of different types of fish. They're called diadromous fish. And I'm just going to say this kind of open. Does anyone know what a diadromous fish is? I assume some of you do, but I'm going to help answer the question. That's an American eel in that picture, and that's a diadromous fish. Diadromous fish are fish that migrate between fresh and salt water. Some of them live most of their life in the ocean, but go to fresh water to lay their eggs, or some fish live most of their life in fresh water and only go to the ocean to lay their eggs. In the case here of the American eel that this student has in that little bucket there, it's about a 2-foot-long American eel. They live almost all of their life, up to 30 years, we estimate potentially even longer, in freshwater ponds and streams, up and down the entire east coast of the United States, up to Canada, all the way up to Greenland, and even into South America. They live in fresh water predominantly. Some of the males live in the estuaries, but the big females go in fresh water for 30 years. They only outmigrate to lay their eggs, and then they die. So the adults only live for 1 year in the ocean and then die. And then the babies that are born migrate back to fresh water. And I have this question. How far do you think those babies from tiny little eggs swim to get back to those rivers and streams? And in the case of, for me in Massachusetts, I ask this question a lot to students, and I get answers like 5, 10 miles, and I say more. And they say 50 miles, and I say more. And then they start raising their hand and say, I can't believe you. Up to 2,000 miles. I'm sure some of you are guessing that question in the box or putting some answers in there. These fish, these baby eels, are born in the Atlantic Ocean east of Bermuda in an area called the Sargasso Sea. All of the eels go there. All the males and females spawn, lay their eggs, they die, and then the babies are born. They hitch a ride on the Gulf Stream, so they follow ocean currents, but they also swim. These two different types of fish in this slide you have here, the silver ones, which there's hundreds in this picture practically, are young of the year. They were born that year. They're actually elbers. They're only 2 to 3 inches long. And the brown ones, I'm guessing in this picture, are 4 to 5 inches long. They're young of the year. They're a year plus. They're probably a 1 to 2 year old eel. And this is a picture of eels at the base of a dam trying to figure out how to get over it. Really fantastic picture though. 2,000 miles. Here's a bucket of eels. I sample with eels with students a lot. We actually have traps that we set and we try to figure out how many eels are caught each day running up over a river. This was one of the biggest days on a small river in my hometown on Millbrook. And one day we got over 500. That was our biggest catch ever. So I got a nice picture of it. They harvest these eels in the East Coast in the state of Maine and South Carolina. It's not allowed in the other states, but those 2 states allow commercial harvest by fishermen. And then I often ask this question, besides how many miles do they swim, how much do you think a commercial fisherman gets for 1 pound of a baby eels, like in that picture there, when they sell them to the fish buyer? And I'm going to show you the price on the next picture. Just think of that question. You know, put it this way, a swordfish, the fisherman gets about $5 a pound. A lobster, he might get $6 a pound. Baby eels, upwards of $2,000 a pound. And I mean that. That's just what the fisherman gets. And some nights, they catch up to 10 pounds. One night with maybe $500 worth of equipment, $20,000 to a fisherman. These baby eels are then put in buckets, in tanks, and they're flown immediately to Asia, China, and Japan, and other areas where they grow them in aquaculture tanks for a year to 2 years, so they become sized that they can then fillet them or steak them for restaurants. And many of these very same eels that were caught in Maine, believe it or not, some of them are flown right back to Portland, Maine, where they're sold in sushi restaurants. That's a lot of frequent flyer miles for this tiny little eel. It swam 2,000 miles to get to Maine. It got captured. And then it was flown, I don't know, 15,000 miles from Maine. I don't know how many miles it is from Maine to China. And then flown back. A lot of traveling for these little eels. Diadromous fish are also river herring. And this is a river herring. This is an anadromous fish. They live most of their life in the ocean and only go to rivers and streams just to lay their eggs, and then they swim back out relatively quickly. And all of these fish that migrate, one of their biggest problems, they have lots of problems like we all do, but one of their biggest problems is that because they have to swim upstream, they hit dams. There are a lot of dams around. I think there's probably dams where everybody on this call is from. And here's a couple of pictures. On the left-hand picture, I'm standing on top of the dam that's on the right-hand picture and looking straight down. Those actually are carp. They don't live in the ocean, but it was a good picture to show you the problem. Even freshwater fish need to migrate even within their streams, but it exemplifies the problem that our migratory fish that my agency works with have. They swim upstream, they hit a dam, and they can't make it over. If you look, and at this particular day that I took this picture, there were thousands of these fish within 100 feet of this dam on the right-hand side. All of that water below that dam is filled with fish trying to make it over. And where my cursor is right now, that's one of these carp jumping. Carp simply cannot jump enough to make it over this dam. So whatever their life cycle is, why they need to get upstream, they're not going to get there. American eels could probably make it over some portions of this dam, but they're probably having a lot of trouble as well. Dams are a major problem for migratory fish. Here's a picture of a dam that actually I removed with working with other partners. This one's actually from New Hampshire, but I didn't have to tell you that. But I'm going to ask you the question: how many dams do you think are just in Massachusetts? You could also think of your own state, or if any of you are from other countries. How many dams do you think are in where you live? And I use Massachusetts as an example, but many states have more or less than Massachusetts. When I usually ask this question, I have people say 20, 30, and some will say.
Hold on, let me give you a few guesses because I've got a bunch coming in here, Eric. So
Okay.
McKenna thinks 15. Desmond
15.
thinks 100.
Yeah.
Let's see. Abigail says 300.
Wow.
Isabella says 2. Let's see. Lily from Olympia says 100. We got 400, 250. There's a few people that are pretty on the money. I don't want to ruin it, but
Okay.
nobody. Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and reveal?
I will. And those answers you just gave, those are the answers I hear from across the board, from adults, students, teachers, my family members. Well, here you go. Over 2,000 dams in Massachusetts alone. And there's more than the 2,000 identified by each one of these red dots, because many of the small dams don't even show up on this database. So at least 2,000. And I can promise you that almost all of these dams are blocking some animal, fish, or insect that lives in the water that wants to go upstream or down. They are creating problems, all of them, for our aquatic system. How many of these dams are actually being used for what they were built for? Probably less than 5%. These dams are left over from the 1700s, 1800s, and early 1900s, all part of the Industrial Revolution. Most of them are abandoned and are doing nothing, and many of them are not being taken care of, unfortunately. And most of them are all blocking migration of animals and insects. Well, which are animals. What's the problem with them? Old dams fall down. People don't take care of them because they have no purpose anymore. They're not making money. This is a dam in my hometown in Rockport. We had a big rain event in 2006. It was called the Mother's Day flood. Hate to attribute it to Mother's Day. The water got too high. I'm standing on the dam looking across. That used to be a walkway in part of a park. This dam was built in the 1700s. It just blew out, went downstream. And then the question always happens when people don't take care of them. Do you fix them or do you restore the river? My job is always to try to restore the river in any possible opportunity. So I'm going to stop here with this little background on fish and dams and ask any more questions. It sounds like people had more fish questions, which I knew there would be. So the reason I put this picture in here during a question session is, why do we care about river herring in eels? Because we do like to eat them. Though many of you probably haven't eaten eels or river herring, but other things like to eat them, like bluefin tuna. And that's a bluefin tuna that I caught last summer. And good chance that bluefin tuna, throughout its 8 to 10 years of life, actually ate some river herring and helped it fatten up before I caught it. So, any questions?
Yes, Brittany, that is definitely a tuna. Isn't it beautiful? So let's see. One of the questions that came in while you were talking asked about what do eels eat while they're migrating? Do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I bet we don't. Well, actually, very, very few eels are ever caught migrating. They're extremely hard to catch in water that's 2 miles deep. When they enter the rivers, that's when we have probably more data. They're eating little insects. And I'm going to tell you one real important thing they're eating, which many people have not thought about. So once those 2 to 3 inch eels enter a river and a stream and start migrating up and they get into the swampy areas, mosquito larvae and insects. And people haven't thought about this that much until recently, because eel populations are way down and nobody likes mosquitoes, I don't think. But eels eat the baby mosquitoes when they're in their larval stage in the small water bodies. So what's good for eels, and our job at protecting eels, is good to keep mosquito populations down. So they like to eat little insects till they start to grow up. As they get bigger, they'll eat baby fish and big fish and a big one might even eat a duckling.
Wow, that is really interesting. So we should love eels.
Yes,
Because
absolutely. It was $2,000 a pound at mosquitoes.
Yeah, because I do not like mosquitoes. Okay, another question from the chat box. I think you better dispense with this one because a few people have asked it already. What is the biggest fish you've ever caught, Eric?
It's probably that one right there. I've caught a bigger tuna than that we had to let go once. It's probably a 350-pound bluefin tuna that we were catching and releasing. But that was one of my biggest right there. Caught it last summer, which was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's great.
That's probably 150-pound. That was probably my guess on that one. 200-pound bluefin tuna.
Great. So a nice question that we got from Alice and Paul in Texas says, here in Texas, we have dams that make big lakes that hold water for us to drink. And I think you're going to answer this question in your next segment, so I just wanted you to hear it. Why so many dams in the Northeast?
Well, the Northeast was settled earlier than Texas, for one. They started building dams almost immediately after they settled this country. And maybe you haven't heard, but they always say how the Industrial Revolution started in Massachusetts. And it started with building of dams and turning moving water into water power that allowed us to create more gadgets with less human power. We let water create the energy to grind corn, to grind wheat, to create sawmills. There are absolutely dams out there, especially out west, that actually have a function and are not going to be removed, and nobody at NOAA is proposing to remove them, especially some of our water supply dams. But I can tell you, every one of our states has a lot of dams that aren't providing any function anymore and are impacting aquatic resources.
Great. I think I'm going to hold on to these to not steal your thunder for the next section.
Okay, well, we'll move on. Okay, the Mayflower 2. I'm assuming most of you in history class or otherwise have heard of the Mayflower, the Pilgrims landing in Plymouth, Massachusetts about 400 years ago. Remember, it's 2020 last year. They landed in 1620. So it's roughly 400 years now since the Pilgrims landed in basically that boat right there. That's close to an exact replica of the boat that they traveled across the Atlantic Ocean on. I don't remember exactly how many, 262 pilgrims plus the crew. I don't have the exact numbers, but they sailed across the Atlantic in that boat. They stopped off at Cape Cod first, but they couldn't find water, so they went a little bit longer, and they came across a fair brook in the town of Plymouth because they needed water. That was a critical piece after sailing across for a couple of months. And if you look at my cursor, this is Plymouth you're looking at in this picture. Plymouth Rock, for those of you who've been there, is right down here in this lower right-hand side. And that's where the Mayflower came in to Plymouth Harbor. And in this area where my cursor is where they settled. This was Plymouth Plantation in this area. And the reason, because of this brook. That blue line is Town Brook. It's a small stream that only runs for about 1.5 miles up to what's called the Billington Sea, which is a lake, about 1.5 miles upstream, about 300 acres large. And soon after they settled here, they started building dams. And then the 6 dams that I found here working with local partners 20 years ago, boy, there were probably 20 or 30 dams built before this that were built, torn down, blown down, rebuilt. But when I got here, there were 6 dams still left on this stream, most of them blocking fish. And I'm going to get into the details of what we did here, of the dams that we found on Town Brook to restore migratory pathways, in particular for eels and river herring. And this is also what they found. If you look closely at this picture, I took this a couple of years ago, and those are river herring in Town Brook after they've left the harbor and entered this brook. And this is a brook that I'm telling you is impacted. This run is small compared to what it used to be. Imagine what it was like when the Pilgrims landed. So they landed their first year, and their first winter was brutal. They didn't have much food. They got diseases. They didn't have good water, and many of them died. I believe upwards of 1/3 of the Pilgrims died their first winter. and they were destitute for food in the springtime. And it was still pretty cold in March and even April in New England. But later in April, these fish started arriving in Town Brook, right next to where they were camping out, living on the boat or living in their makeshift shelters on land. And millions of fish arrived that they didn't know anything about, right at their fingertips. And this gave them immediate sustenance to build up their energy and just have food at their fingertips. The native Wampanoag, according to history that many of us have learned in school, taught them also, besides smoking and eating these fish, they used them for fertilizer. They planted fish with their seeds of corn to help fertilize, natural fertilizer for their seeds. So they picked the right place to land. But 400 years of what we, humans and settlers, do here and all around the world, we built dams over the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s, and the 1900s. And I worked with the town of Plymouth and other partners to remove the dams on Town Brook. And I'm going to just give you a quick rundown of those projects. I'm going to start the first one right at the harbor. If you look at that left-hand picture, that was under construction. That's the harbor. You can see a boat in the background of that left-hand picture right there with my cursor is. That's the harbor, and that's the brook right there. We removed that first dam. This is the construction removing the dam. A year later, you can see 2014 on that bridge. We built a bridge. The old dam used to be right here where these rocks are. Fish have no problem swimming up now. They just swim right up in. They're not blocked by a dam. About 1,000 feet upstream, there's another dam. This is called the Jenny Gristmill. The Jenny Gristmill is actually a museum teaching the public. For any of you that have been to Plymouth Plantation, it's owned by Plymouth Plantation. And this dam is actually going to stay, or at least for the foreseeable future. They have a fairly decent fish ladder. We're making additional improvements. And it's an interpretation center where it's not just about just the history of the structures and the Pilgrims. We have an opportunity to teach people about the aquatic resources. And in this case, on the right-hand slide, is a friend of mine, Darius Coombs, who's a native Wampanoag of the Mashpee tribe, giving a demonstration to the public about harvesting river herring right here at this dam. So we use this site as for demonstrations and to teach people about the harvesting practices. And Darius will take those fish home and eat them for dinner. 1,000 feet upstream. That's it, just 1,000 feet roughly. Next dam, dam number 3. It's called the Holmes Dam. When I first arrived a number of years ago, about 20 years ago, in this left-hand picture where all these Tonka trucks are, those aren't really Tonka trucks. Those are real machinery ripping this dam down. That is the dam right there. There's a big lake on the left-hand side, a pond holding water back, and all that stream went underground, and this was a playground where these trucks are now on this side, and this was just a wetland. We removed all of this material, everything you see here, removed the dam, and we created a new stream that you can see on the right-hand side. And for those of you that like to skateboard and use parks, we built one of the best skateboard parks in this part of Massachusetts. Kids flock here from all around. They were breaking into the skateboard park before it was even finished. We had to put a policeman out there to keep them out. So besides having one of the best restored rivers in the state, we also have one of the best skateboard parks. One of the interesting things we found when we removed this dam, we started to see mud and something showing up after we removed the dam. Something was emerging and we didn't know what it was. We pulled it out. It was a car from the 1970s. And we found out from the police it was a stolen car that no one ever found. And they ditched it in the pond behind the dam. I've found all kinds of interesting things over the years behind dams, but this was one of the first hidden cars that I had found. Of course, we're always worried that we're going to find a human body in it. We looked pretty close and didn't find any bones. So that was made our day that we didn't find any humans in it, but never found out any more details than that. Next dam up. This was the first dam ever removed in the state of Massachusetts to restore migratory fish. That's it on the left-hand side. Just before removal, had a fish ladder on it right there, but it was broken. Fish would swim upstream and then they'd just go right back downstream. It was basically what I call a fish killing machine. The fun thing about this dam, we got the US Army to come in and do it as a training exercise. They came here as a convoy with about 50 soldiers with their camouflaged equipment and remove this dam as a training exercise. And then this is what we do at these sites. After they're done removing the dam, we go in with our partners and plant trees and shrubs and grasses. A few years later, you'd never know there was a dam there. These are the pictures on the right-hand side. This is even 7 years ago. Those trees are almost full grown now. This was just a decent picture I throw in here. We try to naturalize these, where these dams were, as close as we can to what they would have looked like 400 years ago. 500 feet upstream, another dam on the Town Brook. And this is, remember, this is just over 1 mile of stream. Dam on the left-hand side, broken fish ladder reaching up to this dam. This one actually was a driveway to someone's house. So besides it being a dam, it was also cars went over it. And that was the pond above the dam. Boom, remove that dam, smash it up, throw it in the dumpster. We built a new bridge. We built them new water lines. We built them a new sewer line. We gave them electrical lines, everything brand new. And then on the right-hand side, you can see what it looks like today. Beautiful restored river, shrubs, grasses, rocks. We got frogs in here, turtles, snakes. Fish have no problem swimming upstream. But 500 feet upstream, another dam. This all took place over 20 years. This was a leaky dam. If you look on the left-hand picture here, water was coming out through what used to have been, it would have been a turbine to have run a mill. Here's the broken fish ladder. Even though water is going down it, some fish could make it up, but water is leaking out. I called this one a turtle killing machine because we'd find turtles that would get caught inside the fish ladder and couldn't get out, and they would spin around until they died. But if you look in the picture, all that water over here, that's leakage through the dam. This dam was failing as we were working on figuring out how to remove it, squirting through holes through the dam, and cars were driving over this because this was a driveway to people's houses as well. So we brought the big Tonka trucks in, smashed this one to smithereens as well in 2015, and that's what it looks like now. That was all a pond before of warm water and contaminated sediments. We removed all the contaminated sediments, restored the river, and now fish have free access up to the 300-acre lake upstream where they're spawning beautifully today. Questions? Oh, there's another fish. Here's a friend of mine, Hugh, with his 2 twin sons, and that is his biggest fish. That was Hugh's biggest fish. Until that day, he had never caught a keeper striped bass, and we took him out bass fishing. So a good stop there for any questions. And I bet you'll probably have a question about the bass, but anyway, any questions?
Yeah, we do have some questions, Eric. Thank you. We got a question from California who asks, who pays for removing the dams?
Who pays? Oh, that's a very good question. And it's a mix. Usually we always look for the owner to pay for some of it. They pitch in because they have some responsibility of ownership. Usually there's some state involvement at state government because they want these for fisheries resources. Federal government, in the case of NOAA, we have grant programs that they apply to us for funding, and we prioritize them for benefits to NOAA resources such as migratory fish. And then often organizations like Trout Unlimited and Ducks Unlimited and nonprofit organizations. So it's a collaboration of many partners on almost all of these projects pitch in together to make them happen.
Great. Okay. And then Tiffany asks, what are some of the obstacles around dam removal?
More obstacles than you can imagine. That's why they take so long to remove. I'll give you a couple of them. One of the biggest obstacles is people love the impoundment behind a dam. I don't blame them. A lot of people like their impoundments. That's a major one. Another one is very expensive. And in many cases, because of industrial use, there's often contaminated sediments above a dam. And it's very expensive to remove contaminated sediments. Often by each cubic yard, sometimes up to $100 per cubic yard has to be removed and put in a landfill that's capped. And many of these dams have 3,000 to 10,000 cubic yards of contaminated sediment behind them. So there's 2 of the major impediments to dam removal: price, complexity, just in timing, and people like their ponds. But we often tell people that like the pond, do you want to pay for fixing the dam? And they'll often say, I don't want to own the dam, I just like the pond. Well, nobody wants to pay to keep up a dam that has no functional use anymore.
Gotcha. I was glad you explained what an impoundment was, because I'm not sure that everyone would understand that. So Texas wants to know what causes the fish ladders to break.
Just time more than anything. So there's two things there. One is we've been trying for hundreds of years to teach fish to use fish ladders. We've had little luck. We don't really know what a fish is thinking. We're doing our best to build fish ladders that we think will work. So there are two problems with fish ladders often. One is sometimes they just don't work, even when they're not even broken and are perfectly brand new and built yesterday. Sometimes we just don't know how to build them quite right. The other is fish ladders are built of concrete. Concrete deteriorates over time, especially when it's in water, and especially in northern climates like where I live. We get ice, we get frozen conditions, thawed conditions. The concrete breaks, it spalls, which it falls apart. So over time, they just fall apart like anything built of concrete. And then it's very, very expensive to rebuild them. The other is fish ladders need to be taken care of every single day. A beaver can clog up a fish ladder in about maybe 2 hours. Sticks get caught in them, debris, snapping turtles get caught in the middle of them. So they get clogged up. So part of it is they take a lot of maintenance, and not all fish can even use a fish ladder. Eels can have a very hard time with some of the fish ladders that might be designed for a different type of fish.
That is very interesting. I think that the fish ladders, people know about them and they're so common, we assume that they work really well. Yeah. But it sounds like they don't always work well.
Yeah, some fish ladders can work really well for some fish. But most fish ladders don't work for all fish. Keep that in mind. Gotcha. Almost all fish ladders just don't work for all.
Casey wants to know, what is the most interesting thing you found when you removed a dam? I think that car is pretty interesting, by the way. A stolen car is pretty cool. But have you found any other things that you want to share?
Yeah, I think probably one of them, I find a lot of old bottles, because bottles don't break down and deteriorate over years. And I found lots of old bottles, and in particular, I find old bottles that have inscriptions on them, and then you can quickly look them up online. And I started finding a lot of bottles, a tincture, which is a formula for helping babies go to sleep. And this is kind of a sad story. The more I looked it up, it was a mixture of alcohol and opium. And thousands of young children back in the 1800s and early 1900s actually died from this medicine bottle that I would find in the rivers. I couldn't believe it. It was really sad. So I'm finding old medicines that weren't good medicines. And I have a number of those bottles that I found. I hope they were thrown because people were mad and threw them in the river to get rid of them. But most of them were actually dumped there just as garbage. So I hate to give you that sad story, but it really was one of the more interesting things I found. But I found all kinds of stuff.
Well, I remember you also saying you found some really old coins as well. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I found lots of coins, lots of old nickels and dimes and quarters. And believe it or not, where I've actually found a lot of them are underneath bridges, because people go to bridges with their girlfriends and their boyfriends and their significant others and make wishes. Even years ago, 150 years ago, when we remove a dam, they all get exposed. And we found coins right underneath some of these bridges, which is kind of interesting.
Well, on that note, I'll let you carry on, because I know you're going to mention something about counting next.
Okay, great. So one of the big questions we have to ask as scientists is, okay, we remove the dams. So what? Did it work? Did we help the fish? Did we help the eels? And the way we do this is we count them. That's one of the ways we count the fish. And in the case of Plymouth Town Brook, we do it a couple of different ways. One is, if you look at this left-hand slide, we actually have volunteers, and this happens to be that one dam that's staying. They stand there and they count the fish, literally with their eyes, with a piece of paper and a clicker in one hand, and count how many fish they see go by in 10 minutes. And we do many of these a day. And if you get enough 10-minute counts, you can calculate how many fish were seen that day. And then you can multiply it times the 2 months that they migrate, in particular April and May, for this species in Massachusetts, we can actually get an estimate of how many fish entered the river that year. And if you look on the right-hand picture, this young boy was looking, he's doing a 10-minute fish count, but in that picture, this little box to the right-hand side where I have my cursor, that's an underwater video camera. We also video camera the fish. So here in Plymouth, any of you on this webinar right now can help count fish here because you can see these fish online. And we get video counts from people all around the world. Last year, we had people do video counts in Plymouth from their home in 41 countries in every state in the United States. And all of the data was collected, helped us estimate how many fish returned to Plymouth Town Brook. And we've been doing this for years now. The camera's new as of 2 years ago, but we've been doing the visual counts back to 2008. And here's a graph of the data. Back in 2008, we had roughly 168,000 fish. And off to the right, you can see 2020, we had 190,000 fish. But the good news is if you look at that dotted line, that's the average over that period. And the good thing is it's going up. I wish it was going up faster, but it's going in the right direction. We are slowly restoring Town Brook, the number of fish returning. Got to remember, when the babies go out to sea, they're out there for 3 to 4 years. So the fish that were born last year, we won't even see them for 4 years. So the work that we did in the past couple of years, we'll hopefully see the results of that in the next couple of years. What can you do? Here's a web page, real simple one, PlymouthRiverHerring.org. You can go to that web page and learn how to come to Plymouth and do 10-minute fish counts visually if you're visiting Plymouth Plantation or seeing the Plymouth Mill. Or if you're not visiting Plymouth or we're still socially distancing this year, which is a good chance we might be, you can help do fish counts online at your camera, at your house, in your bedroom by going to PlymouthRiver.org. There are clips there now that you can count fish. And in the spring, when we have the camera operating again, you'll actually be able to see them live. I challenge you all and request that all of you take a look at this. So it's really an exciting, this year we're shooting for Antarctica. We got 41 countries last year. I don't think we got Antarctica last year, but we're gonna shoot for Antarctica and we're gonna try to get Greenland as well. Our goal this year is to get 100 countries counting fish in Plymouth as part of that 400th anniversary. 400 years of building dams in Plymouth and 20 years of removing them for fish. Who we restore rivers for, just to remind you, for the baby eels, for the river herring. This is hundreds of baby eels at the base of a dam trying to figure out how to get over it. And when eels pile up like this below a dam, they get picked off. They get eaten by everything, birds, minks, raccoons, possums, you name it. Some of them will make it over, but when you take any fish like this and pile them up at one location, many of them won't make it over the dam any way they can. Here's that same dam. And if you look in these crevices and these nooks and crannies, lots of baby eels trying to figure out how to get over this dam. Help us, help these eels. That's why we're removing dams wherever we can, where it makes sense. Questions? This is my final slide. And for those of you that want to learn more about eels, this book only came out 2 years ago. I don't own it, I didn't write it, and I don't know the author, but it's a really good book that came out. It was on an international bestseller, all about eels, and it's written in a way that just about anybody could read this and enjoy it from grade school to, all through your life. Very good book. I'm open to any more questions that anybody else may have.
Thanks, Eric. Well, we are a little over time, but I have just a couple of questions that I wanted to ask. Carol has had a lot of questions about the eels that I couldn't get to today, so I appreciate your suggestion for the book. I've already requested a copy at my library because you piqued my curiosity, especially that last picture of the eels. Oh, they're so sweet. So let's see. Madison asks, what is your favorite part of your job?
My favorite part of the job, it's kind of funny, and I'm well known for it, is as a dam is being removed physically, when the excavators and the jackhammers are smashing it apart, and the river upstream is starting to reform for the first time, in some cases 300 years, and sediment is going downstream and the walls are caving in, it's reforming. I love to be in the river looking for old junk and looking for fish going upstream. I've been at dam removal sites where I've seen the first fish swim up on that first day for the first time in hundreds of years. That's exciting.
That does sound exciting. And what are you wearing when you're standing in the river?
Sometimes if it's summertime and it's clean sediments, I'm in there with just a light pair of shoes and shorts and enjoying the cool water around my legs. And if it's wintertime, I've got hip waders on and all the warm clothes you can possibly imagine, and sometimes the need of a life preserver as well.
All right, and we have another question from Carmen. She wants to know, did you think when you went to school that this is what you would be doing?
I have memories of the Sierra Club and some of the environmentalists from the 1960s and 70s who were fighting to remove dams in California when I was a kid. That always stayed in my brain. And we weren't doing it back then, but the environmental movement of this country, our country, knew we needed to. And it was always there. And it was exciting to be actually helping deliver what people were pushing for 30 and 40 years ago.
Wow. Well, it has been so fun talking to you, Eric. There are unfortunately some questions that I can't get to. I want to let Brittany get one question in, which she wants to know, are there other animals that try to go up the fish ladders, you know, that could get injured or die, or do turtles get hurt, that kind of thing? Can you speak to that quickly?
Yep, we've seen river otters in fish ladders, lots of species of eels, turtles, lots of species of fish other than the migratory type. What else have we seen? Mostly otters. You see a lot of otters, which is kind of fun because they're really good swimmers, and especially when we have a camera. We actually have cameras in place, and you'll be looking at fish, and all of a sudden there's an otter staring right at the lens of the camera. Now that's pretty fun, but they're at risk too because sometimes they can get hurt in there. Turtles are what I see get damaged the most. Turtles sometimes go in a fish ladder or over a dam and smash their shell when they fall over it. So that's one of the reasons, whenever possible, it's nice to remove a dam. It's not just to help the fish, but to protect the turtles as well. And if anyone has any additional questions, by all means, feel free to call me, or there's my email address. Be happy to answer anybody's question.
I seem to have lost audio. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. I'm sorry. My computer's telling me my audio is not connected, so I just wanted to confirm. I just want to point out to everybody that we talked about a few other webinars. Diadromous Fish, Abigail Archer from Woods Hole Sea Grant talked about herring in one of our other NOAA Live webinars. And we also had Sarah Bailey from our Orono office in Maine talk about salmon. And we have put both of those for your reference near Eric's webinar on our webpage. So we are so grateful that you joined us today, Eric. It was really fascinating hearing about your experiences busting dams. And we hope that you guys will join us next week. I'm trying to think of who our next presenter is next week. Oh, we're going to be talking about design to survive, preparing your home to withstand storms with Kanisa. So that is going to be wonderful. So we hope you can join us next week, same time. And thank you again, Eric. It was really fun.
You're welcome. And thank you for all the participants for joining in today. Have a great day.
All right. Bye, everybody.